All right, no more swearing, everybody.
Okay.
Even Boo Boy?
Even Boo Boy.
Oh,
All
okay.
right,
Keep
keep it clean. All right, so tonight's question is, what is religious tolerance? I often, when people send me questions, I try to kind of figure out what they're really asking, if you know what I mean. Sometimes the questions are not, they're not just a simple question, they're kind of a paragraph trying to explain to me what they're looking for. And so I try to figure out kind of how can I ask this question in the simplest way possible and address what the person is asking, but also address kind of the wider issues related to the question. And so this question comes from a question about why religions all think that they are the only one that has the truth or is right. And I thought that was an interesting question because that is not actually always the case. There are some religions that do not think that they are the only ones who are right. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But I thought we could kind of expand the question to talk more in general about religious tolerance, because this is a really challenging question and it's a really important question for us in our current political and social climate, especially here in the United States. So let's do it. So assumptions that come with this question. I think we need to talk first about what tolerance is and what it isn't, perhaps, and then we can maybe go from there. So tolerance, what is tolerance? And I started thinking about this. This is one of those questions that I can't just, go on the internet and Google religious tolerance and have all the information that I need right there. This is not a history lesson or even a Bible interpretation lesson. This is the kind of question where you have to really do a lot of your own thinking about what it is that you want to say and think about it. So I started thinking about this question, what is tolerance? And I kind of came up to the idea that it really depends on who you are, where you live, when you live, the people that surround you. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit even about kind of the development of the concept of religious tolerance and tolerance in general that we even find in our own Bible, because there's some interesting stuff going on with it. So the first thing I want to show you is a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 7. And I don't have the whole thing here, but I just gave you kind of the important bits, and I'll read the whole thing for you.
Oh.
What's that, Jim? You okay, Jim?
I thought I lost sound. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, so Deuteronomy chapter 7. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them,
It's
then,
Kimberly.
No.
are
Katie,
you losing
you're
me?
out.
You're losing me?
Yes.
Yeah, a lot.
All right, let's see what we can do about that. Is that any better?
Keep talking.
All right, let me read this to you, and if it keeps going, then I'll keep going, but if it doesn't, let me know. All right, so when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons, for that would turn away your children from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But this is how you must deal with them. Break down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their sacred poles, and burn their idols with fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on earth to be his people, his treasured possession. Did that come through better that time?
Yes,
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, good.
yes, it was.
All right, let me get back to sharing then. So this passage from Deuteronomy is pretty standard in terms of what the oldest portions of our Bible tell us about how the Israelites are to handle foreigners, and especially foreigners of a different religion. And the reason for it, let's get our, there we go. The reason for it is right in the passage. It says, if you intermarry with them or interact with them in any way, that would turn away your children from following me to serve other gods. So the fear is that if you are tolerant of other religions, then you will be influenced by them. You will fall into what they've got going on. And this is actually pretty common, pretty standard in terms of this period of time in history, that different tribes, different tribal groups in the ancient Near East all had their own tribal god. And so you even see some evidence of this within the Bible itself. But there's also a tension with this kind of idea, because in specific situations, it says, hey, don't interact with these people. They're going to turn you away from the correct religion. You need to get rid of these people, because if you don't, then they're going to mess you up. But then you also get things that like this, which happens only 3 chapters later in the same book in Deuteronomy. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So these two ideas kind of seem to be conflicting a little bit. Are we supposed to destroy strangers because they're a threat to us and to our way of life and to our dedication and faithfulness to our God? Or are we supposed to embrace strangers and support them and take care of them and love them because they are humans that God loves too? And we see this tension, this struggle throughout the entire Old Testament, that there is this desire to support the in-group, to strengthen the bonds of the in-group, to prevent others from outside from infiltrating and changing things and threatening the way of life and the way that they worship and the decisions that they make. But then there's also this acknowledgement that everybody outside of our in-group is loved by God too. And so there's this huge tension, this huge kind of internal conflict throughout the entire Old Testament about how we deal with this. And there is evidence, like I said, in the Old Testament of this, even the slow transition that took place in terms of how the people understood these issues of how do you deal with a stranger? How do you deal with somebody that's different from you? How do you deal with someone who doesn't share your religion? There are places and stories and verses in the Old Testament that seem to assume a particular religious landscape. Judges chapter 11, verse 24 is in the middle of a conversation that the judge Jephthah, who is not very well known, is having with the Ammonites, which is another tribe in the region. And they are in the middle of a territorial dispute. And Jephthah says to them, our God, Yahweh, gave us this land. And he says to them, will you not take what your God Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever Yahweh, our God, has given us, we will possess. So he's trying to explain, he's trying to validate, he's trying to even maybe apologize to the Ammonites for this conflict that they're having over this territory, this land. But he's saying, hey, look, you have your tribal god, Chemosh, and you honor Chemosh and you do what Chemosh tells you to do. And if Chemosh gives you a gift, you accept it. We believe that our God, our tribal God Yahweh, has given us this land. And of course, because we've received it from Yahweh, we're going to possess it. We're going to take it. And so that's the conflict here. Whose God is right? Whose God is wrong? So this is not, this is not a problem now, because you've got your God, I've got my God. We believe that our gods love us and care about us and want what's best for us. Obviously, they're going to be in conflict with one another sometimes, because if what we need and what you need are the same thing and we have to fight over it, then our gods are going to, fight on our side. The problem only comes when the Israelites have to start thinking bigger. And the reason for that is a huge crisis in the life of the nation of Israel and Judah, the people that have been part of this story for so long. As we've talked about many times before, in the year 587 BC, the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar successfully attack and destroy Jerusalem, and they take a lot of the people of Israel into captivity. They have destroyed the kingship that God promised would last forever through David. They destroy the temple, which is their access point to God on the earth. They destroy their holy city, and they take away their ability to be a people together. And so how are they going to figure out how to move forward? Well, they come up with this radical revolutionary idea. Even though our tribal God seems to have lost, seems to have abandoned us, that is not the case, because our tribal God is not just our God in our territory alone. Our tribal God is with us no matter where we go. And so then we start to see stories like Daniel chapter 1. In Daniel chapter 1, Daniel and his friends are taken into captivity, and they go to Babylon, and they are conscripted into the military. And they are told that they have to learn how to work in the royal court. And part of that is that they are being culturally educated to live like, to be like Babylonians. They're supposed to give up their old ways, their old culture, their own old religion, and become culturally Babylonians. And one of the things that that meant was that they had to start eating the same thing that the Babylonians ate. But Israelites, Jews, had particular ritual and religious reasons for why they did or did not eat certain types of food. And so by choosing to eat what it was given to them by the royal court, they were not just rejecting their culture, they were rejecting their God. Are you hearing me okay? I'm breaking up a little on my own end here. Okay. So this story starts with, it says, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. So he asked the palace master to allow him not to defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion from the palace master. The palace master said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your age, you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel asked the guard whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Araziah. Please test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations and deal with your servants according to what you observe. So he agreed to this proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. So the guard continued to withdraw the royal rations and the wine, and they were to drink and gave the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So the key to this passage, I think, in terms of our conversation for tonight, is this verse. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion from the palace master. I don't think that we in modern Christianity can understand just how radical a sentence that is. God, Yahweh, is the God of the Jews, of this particular tribe of people, this particular nation of people. The palace master is not from that group. And so this passage is telling us, this sentence is telling us that this God that Daniel worships, this God that comes from the Jewish people, has power over, has control to place in the heart of somebody from a different nation what they should or shouldn't do in an effort to support Daniel. This is wildly different than anything that has come before. This idea that a God could reach outside of the tribal group and manipulate people for their own purposes. This is brand new, but this opens up a whole can of worms, a whole new way of understanding who God is and where God's authority lies. So as we keep moving forward, we come into something like Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah is considered one of the earliest of the Old Testament writings, even though it comes much later in terms of the chronology of the story that it's telling. And Isaiah chapter 45, verses 20 to 22 says, "Assemble yourselves and come together. Draw near, you survivors of the nations." So this is spoken to all the nations. "They have no knowledge, those who carry around their wooden idols and keep on praying to a God that cannot save. Declare and present your case. Take counsel together. Who told this long ago? Who declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord? There is no other God besides me, a righteous God and a Savior. There is no one besides me. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other." So this becomes incredibly complicated. At first, it seems fine. Excuse me. This is my God, and I'm just saying that this God has more power than your God. So much more that, in fact, I don't think that your God even exists. But what are the implications of that? What are the ethical implications of that? If my God that I've been relying on to be on my side of any conflict that I have with you for generations suddenly is understood to also be your God, then how can I ask that God to be on my side in a competition or a conflict with you when I know that you're going to be asking the same thing? How can I ask that God to destroy you if I know that that God is on your side too? If this is the only God, if this God created everything and not just me as a member of my particular tribe, how do I deal with you? How do I interact with you as someone who's different than me? Because now we have a deep connection to one another that we did not have previously. And that connection is through this universal God. So monotheism actually is a huge turning point in the development toward human ethics and even human rights. Because if we all decide that every person, no matter who they are, where they come from, has value in the eyes of the same God that we believe we have value in, then our value is now linked to the value of that person that used to be our enemy or we think is our enemy. I can't say that God loves me and cares about me and wants what's best for me without saying the same thing about you, no matter what I think about you. And so now I have to treat you accordingly. And that's where we start to get passages like love the stranger because you were a stranger. And that's where we start to get that tension. Well, we want to protect ourselves from people who are different from us and maintain our purity in our religious traditions. But now that we believe that there's only one God over all things, who created all things, who created you, created all these people, and we believe that this God is benevolent, loves us, and we can't really believe that God loves us without believing that God loves everyone. Because if God created me and loves me because I'm created by God, and God created you and loves you because you were created by God, now I have to treat you all differently. I have to treat you better than I was before. So can everybody kind of see how this is a problem that has to be wrestled with when this concept of there being one God over all things, this idea of a universal truth, as it developed, really started to complicate things quite a bit. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there for a minute and see what questions and comments we have before we keep going. Anything?
So are we to judge then?
I don't know.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or, try to turn them away, try to save them or convert them, try to speak your truth.
Right.
I mean, we are called to reach out.
Yeah.
Bring people to God.
So that's a perfect transition, because I'm going to jump ahead several centuries. I don't have time to go over everything, but I want to share with you. We're talking about this tolerance thing, and so what is tolerance in context? We just talked about the context of several centuries of Israelite and Jewish history, and at certain points, because our understanding of God was more limited, we didn't really care what other people thought. We didn't tolerate their religion with us because we were threatened by them. We didn't want them influencing us, but we could do that easily because our God is our God and your God is your God, and we aren't making any kind of claim that those things can't coexist. But as soon as we say, no, there's only one God universally, now we are making a statement that we are applying not just to ourselves, but to everyone, regardless of whether they agree with us or not. And so we kind of get into this complicated situation. The same thing is happening in medieval Europe. Pope Boniface VIII is struggling with some burgeoning heresies, in his opinion, conflicts of interest, differences of opinion. And so he states in a papal bull, which is the highest level of statement that you can make as the Pope, he says, furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. So if you are a Muslim, you are not subject to the Roman pontiff, and so you are not saved. If you are excommunicated because you believe the wrong thing, or you said the wrong thing, or you did the wrong thing, you are not saved. The only way for you to have salvation is through subjection to the Pope. Just so happens that I, as the person who is making this claim, am the person that you have to be subject to. Good for me, but that's how it works. Sorry, guys. So why does he say this? Well, we can be cynical, like I like to be often, and we can say, of course, he just wants power. He wants to make sure he can control everybody. And so he threatens people's eternal salvation by telling them that if they don't just listen to him and do everything he says, then they're going to go to hell. But you could also say that he is trying to help these people, right? The Bible says that Jesus tells us, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, I don't believe that it's appropriate to interpret that passage in light of religious tolerance and intolerance, and I'm not even bringing that passage into our conversation for today because of that. but a lot of people have used it over the course of centuries to support their own argument that the only way to earn salvation is through Jesus. And for Pope Boniface, the only way to ensure that you are doing the right thing by Jesus is to do the right thing by me, because I am his representative on earth as the Pope. So are we doing this out of the kindness of our hearts, attempting to help these people? Or are we doing it to control them and to enforce our own opinions and our own religious perspectives on things? It's really kind of hard to say. Things get worse. In 1401, King Henry IV in England passed a law. Well, Parliament passed the law, but it was under Henry IV, and it was in regards to the Lollards. Now, the Lollards were a sect, a heretical group, according to them, at least they used that word heretical, that was led by John Wycliffe. And John Wycliffe was kind of a precursor to Martin Luther and John Calvin and some of those guys. He wanted to translate the Bible into the vernacular so that people could read it for themselves. And they had some other kind of strange things going on. But there were so many of them, and they were causing such an uproar in England that Parliament passed this law. It said, "This wicked sect should henceforth cease and be utterly destroyed. And if any person should fail to abjure their heretical beliefs, they shall be burnt, so that such punishment may strike fear into the minds of others." So this is pretty much, I think, the height of intolerance from our modern day perspective. But from the perspective of somebody in this time and place, this is actually their attempt to create that safety. It's the same exact impulse that the Jews had earlier. What are we supposed to do with outsiders who threaten us and threaten our way of life and threaten our way of worshiping God that we know is right? We must utterly destroy them. It's even the exact same words, right? In the English translation of the Old Testament passage from Deuteronomy, it said they must be utterly destroyed. And here again, it says they must be utterly destroyed. Why? Because we have to protect ourselves. We have to protect our connection to God. We have to protect other people's connections to God. They're not as strong as us. They don't know how awful this group of people is and how they're trying to lure them away. These people are in league with Satan, who is trying to snatch these people's souls away from God. So tolerance has never been something that is easy to navigate through, and it's certainly something that is really difficult to wrap our minds around, because these people at this time, I think, if you'd asked them, aren't you being intolerant? They would have just looked at you like, I don't understand what you're even asking me. This is important. We've got to do this for the sake of these people. Why are we doing this? Then we're going to jump ahead. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
A couple of things. Could Pope Boniface's statement have been prompted by the end of the Crusades?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wondered that.
Yeah, there were some crusades going on at that time.
They couldn't get him through they couldn't get him through the Crusades. So now he comes up with this and says, okay, you had your chance.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I have to admit from this point on that I have a bias against the word tolerance. I think tolerance is too low a bar.
All right. Well, we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Okay.
With that.
So I had to come.
Yes. Yes. Good. Good. Yes. We're going to get there. So I want to jump forward now again, several centuries. And now we're going to get into something that we're a little more familiar with, the Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, right? But what does that actually mean? What are we being freed from? Or are we being freed for something? Is freedom of religion freedom to behave however we want? Is freedom of religion freedom to demand that others behave however we want them to? I think a lot of people talk about, these days, a lot of people are complaining because they feel like they're being forced to accept things that supposedly go against their beliefs. Laws are passed that allow for gay marriage, or rights for trans people, or rights for immigrants, or rights for women, and people say, you are violating my freedom of religion by forcing me to accept these things. But I don't think that that's actually true. I think that when we're talking about tolerance, we have to make sure that we're being careful about what it is we're actually talking about here, because when these types of laws are passed in the secular realm, nobody is being told how they have to feel about a particular issue or a particular group of people. They're still allowed to hate those people, to think they're sinful, to want to convert them in some way. But what you're not allowed to do based on those laws is try to make those people's lives harder just because you don't like what they're doing. You're not allowed to turn their lives into a battleground between you and the politics that you don't like. So nobody's actually forcing you to accept anything. You're just, at the end of the day, being prevented from terrorizing people. So I think that in the United States, tolerance is, when we're asking the question, what is tolerance? In the United States today, tolerance isn't a practice. Tolerance is an enforceable law. I must tolerate your existence. I cannot terrorize you. I cannot get in the way of your living of your life because my beliefs different from yours. I don't have to like you. I don't have to accept what it is that you're doing, but I am not allowed to interfere. I must tolerate you existing. And it's a shame to me that there are a lot of people in this country right now who can't even do that. Can you tolerate the existence of another human that looks different from you, or sounds different from you, or worships their God different from you? For some people, the answer to that question is no. So how different, all these different understandings of tolerance that, depending on where you are and when you are and who you are, affect how you understand tolerance to be, and what you believe you can or are obligated to tolerate. So any questions, comments at this point?
So it seems to me that tolerance has different meanings or applications depending on how you're talking about it.
Yes, I think that's where I'm trying to go with it. Yes.
I
Anything
think that
else?
a lot of people feel like, because of the Bill of Rights, that we have freedom from religion, that well, I'm not saying it right. What does it mean? I mean, is it freedom from religion or freedom of religion, or what does it mean?
Mm-hmm. So it's
And
a challenging thing, isn't it?
well, yeah. And if you say freedom from religion, does that mean that everyone has to be atheist? I mean, do we have to everybody give up religion because we have freedom and we can do that?
Or can you choose to be free from religion, that you're not forced to choose a religion?
That's how I interpret it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're
so
not forced to do it.
I think it means something different for every person, depending on their relationship to religion as a concept, to their particular religion, to the goals of their particular religious traditions. All of these things matter when you're thinking about what freedom of religion and what tolerance means and how it works. So it's a very complicated concept for sure.
Right, but it seems like there's a lot of people that are trying to beat everybody into the same mold, like if you don't believe what I believe, then you're evil. I can't tolerate you,
Yep.
True.
and I'm sure that's not what it all means.
Well, I think from the Bill of Rights standpoint, it is our freedom to choose whether we believe in a higher power or religion. We have the freedom to choose whether to do that or not.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I
And
think
But
something
but
And
as
the
soon as-
we
main
forget.
point is, well, we can't even if we don't agree with somebody else's practices or their agnostic or atheist views, we don't have the right to terrorize them, and they don't have the right to terrorize us.
Right. And I think that is something that people
I
miss.
think it's trying to create some harmony.
I think something that people miss with the Bill of Rights in particular is that the Bill of Rights is not a limitation on the individual citizen's behavior so much as it is a limitation on the behavior and abilities of the government. The government is not allowed to tell us what religion we must be or none or a certain one. The government is not allowed to prevent us from from choosing how we choose to believe, how we choose to practice our faith. And that's different than what I do from day to day. Now the government is responsible for protecting that right that I have, so that if an individual tries to prevent me from practicing my religion in the way that I feel I need to, then it's the government's responsibility to protect me from that. But it doesn't have anything to do with how other people are practicing, which I think is where we kind of lose our way. That it's about, I can believe whatever I want, but I cannot impose that belief on other people through terror, through manipulation.
Okay. My take on the whole thing is back then, one of the reasons these immigrants were coming from this country was to get away from the Catholic Church. It wasn't really the Catholic Church, it was what they call themselves. Anyways, they were very not tolerant. If you didn't become a member of the Church of Britain or England, is that you were being punished. Okay. And
Mhm.
so when they wrote the Bill of Rights, they didn't want to specifically say the Church of England. They say religion, that you have the freedom from religion to choose what you want. Basically, back to that was the fascist way that the church was operating then. It had a lot to do with the dark ages, is that you got to believe what we teach you, not what is actually reality. Okay, so they really dominated the people. I think they wanted to get away from that, and that's why I think it's freedom from religion. Okay, that you have the right to do that. That's why that was put in. That's my feeling.
Mhm. So perfect transition, because you said something really interesting, Jim. You said they wanted to force us to believe what they taught and not what is actually true.
Correct.
So that's really interesting, because now I want to talk to you all about truth with a capital T. Who is in charge of truth? Who gets to say what is truth? So in Acts chapter 4, verse 12, our good friend Peter is giving a little sermon, and he says, "There is salvation in no one else," referring, of course, to Jesus, "for there is no other name under heaven given among mortals by which we must be saved." So Peter tells us that the name of Jesus is the only way that we can obtain salvation. When we talk about truth, when we talk about that capital T truth that that transcends what any of us personally think, things can start getting really hairy. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between subjective truth claims and objective truth claims, because when we're talking about religion, sometimes we're talking about subjective truth claims, but most of the time we're talking about objective truth claims. So a subjective truth claim is a claim that I make in the context of what I'm saying. You understand that this is a truth that is applicable to me. And so you don't need to agree or disagree with me. I'm just kind of stating my opinion. So I might say something like, my favorite movie in the whole world is Apollo 13. Apollo 13 is the best movie ever made. That is a statement of my truth. The best movie ever made. But none of you right now are getting super angry and feeling like you have to rise up against me and say, no, that is not the best movie ever. And then, state your claim. Because we have in our conversations, in our culture, the understanding that I can say something that bold about a movie and you understand that that truth only applies to me. That is subjective truth. But an objective truth claim is a claim that I believe to be true, not just for myself, but for all people, regardless of their personal opinions. So when I make an objective truth claim, there are real consequences for the person who I'm telling that to, who I'm sharing that with, to agree or disagree. At least there are consequences in my mind. So if I tell you Apollo 13 is the best movie in the entire world, that is the truth. That's my truth. And you can kind of accept that because that's kind of the way that our culture works. But if I tell you that the only way to get salvation is through Jesus Christ, then that affects you in a way that my claiming that Apollo 13 is the best movie ever does not affect you. And so when we're talking about objective truth claims, truth is something that you really can't avoid judgment. You can't avoid the element of exclusivity that is inherent in the statement of an objective truth. If I state something that is objectively true, in my opinion, that applies to everyone, then I am implicitly passing judgment on any claims that might contradict what I'm saying. And by claiming this truth, I'm also excluding any opposing beliefs from the possibility that they could be true. And I don't think that we need to apologize for that as Christians, because Christianity, is not just a collection of nice little sayings and ideas that kind of give comfort to people who like them and can be ignored by other people. Christianity makes objective truth claims about how the world is organized, about why events occur in history, about who we are, about our identities as human beings. And that is the core of what it means to be a Christian. And so I don't think we can apologize for that, because by apologizing for that, we are saying that, the core of what this is all about is something shameful, something to be something to be ashamed of, something for others to be offended by. But it's really hard because it just takes us right back to Deuteronomy, right? We are trying to share the truth from how we see it. This is how the world works. This is what's going on in the world. This is how you interpret. This is what's going on in history. But we also have to balance those two things. Are we threatened by people who are different and who don't agree with us? Or are we supposed to take what we believe, what we claim to believe as an objective truth, and apply that to the way that we interact with people, even without, even if they don't agree with us. And that's really hard. You know, that's not something that I can tell us how to navigate. So we've got this little quote: "The exclusivity and judgment of truth cannot be escaped." When you are talking about capital T truth that applies to everybody, then there's always going to be some level of judgment in that. But I think that what we have to do is we have to figure out how to be unapologetically Christian in our convictions about these core truths. We make claims about who we are, who God is, how the world works, where the world came from, and we don't have to apologize for that. But how do we do that in a way that shows respect for other people? We have to really find, figure out where that balance is going to be. Because at the end of the day, I was going to take you through a whole bunch of different religious traditions and how they understand this concept of tolerance. But I felt like it was just kind of repeating the same thing that I've already said. The early Jews had this limited understanding of God. Our God is for us. And so it doesn't really matter what other people think. So they were never making objective truth claims that applied to everyone. They were only making truth claims that applied to them. As soon as you have one God that is over all and in all and through all, then you start making objective truth claims. And so there are some religious traditions that do make objective truth claims, and there are some religious traditions that don't make objective truth claims, but or think that they don't. But really, at the end of the day, I think all of them do, because even, for example, Baha'i, which is kind of popular around this area. I don't know if any of you know any Baha'i people, but the founder of the Baha'i faith felt like all of this judgment of different religions of each other was wrong, and so tried to argue that there are lots of different religions that are equally meaningful expressions of the same reality, that all it is just different perspectives and different cultural ways of expressing the same thing. But the problem is that in order to bring this kind of insight into fruition, what happened was this guy ended up creating a whole new religion with a whole new set of judgments and claims about objective truth. Now, those objective truth claims had to do with the validity of all, many perspectives and all these different kinds of things, but they're still making objective truth claims, and therefore they're going to come into conflict with other objective truth claims of other people. And so there's always going to be judgment. There's always going to be opposition. There's always going to be rejection of other ideas that are different than the truth claim that you are making. So what we have to do, I think, knowing that we can't escape from this judgment, any truth claim that we make is going to inherently have that judgment in it. How do we live with our convictions in a respectful way? What does respect look like? And I think, again, like this question, what is tolerance? On the face of it seems fairly easy, but as soon as you start thinking about it in terms of, real life situations, it becomes much more complicated. What does respect look like? I think becomes a really complicated question really quickly too. For those of you who were with us for the class that we had several weeks ago, What is Islam? We talked a little bit about kind of a quick history of Islam, and we talked about how in the early Middle Ages in particular, the Muslim world was thriving. And so there was lots of advantage to living in a Muslim empire, even if you weren't a Muslim. And Muslims accepted that. If you lived in the Muslim world in the Middle Ages, you were allowed to live. You were tolerated. You didn't have to participate in the Muslim religious practices. You didn't have to pay Muslim taxes, but you did have to pay different taxes that they imposed on only non-Muslims for their non-Muslimness. So can you imagine, living in the United States right now and having somebody say to you, well, I'm going to tolerate your existence. I'm not going to harass you, but the fact that you aren't X religion means that you have to pay this tax that people who are X religion don't have to pay. I mean, just the fires that would be set on people's heads would be amazing. But this is how it was. And this was the better of the situations, because what was going on in medieval Christian Europe? People were not tolerated in any way, shape, or form. They were being burnt at the stake, right? Even if they were Christians, but had a different opinion about how they were supposed to practice their Christianity, they were being burnt at the stake. So imagine what it was like to be a Muslim in medieval Christian empire. At least as a Christian in a Muslim empire, you wouldn't be killed. You had to pay extra taxes, and there were some other things that you had to live in certain areas and things like that. So what does tolerance look like? What does respect look like? Depending on where you live, it's going to look very different. Please just don't kill me is, a pretty low bar when it comes to tolerance. But if you lived in medieval Christian Europe, that was kind of where you were. But then I think that brings us to another place, which is asking a question from the position of the person who is tolerating, being tolerant. What should and should not be tolerated? What can we tolerate and what can't we tolerate? There have been times in history when different religious traditions have clashed, and governments or groups of people with power have made decisions about whether they would or would not tolerate particular practices. For example, in India, in the Hindu religion, there used to be, and in some places continues to be, a practice in which when a man dies, if his wife is still alive, she is to throw herself onto his funeral pyre and burn herself to death because her husband is gone, and that is part of her honoring of her husband. And there's nothing left for her in the world anyway, just nobody to support her, so get rid of her thing. When the British invaded India and took over India, they tolerated this practice. They allowed it to continue until 1829. In 1829, wow. They finally outlawed this practice. Now, today, like I said, there are still places where people practice this, and every once in a while, I haven't seen one in a long time, so maybe it's not really happening much anymore. But in my lifetime, in my adulthood, there have been times when we've seen something like that on the news, where a woman has been compelled to or chosen to throw herself on the funeral pyre of her dead husband. This is a religious practice. Is this something that we should tolerate? If we are trying to be tolerant of other people's religions, then we have to understand that this is something that they do, and we need to let them do it, right? I don't know. In that particular situation, that's kind of tough. On the other hand, when the United States government started to really colonize the West and kind of take over the wildness and try to have some kind of semblance of order and uniformity in their laws, they ran into the Mormons in what is now Utah, and they discovered that they were practicing polygamy. And they said, oh, no, we don't do that. And so they did not tolerate that particular religious tradition. Was that the right decision or the wrong decision? It depends on your perspective, right? Of course, to the people who were being not tolerated, they felt like they were being oppressed. But to people who were making that decision not to tolerate it, they were saying, we're trying to protect these women. We're trying to protect, the concept of a family unit that is important to us in our culture. So this conflict of universal truth claims comes into play, and then political power and social power can influence who wins that struggle, at least in terms of how things are playing out in behaviors, even if they don't play out that way in terms of how people believe. You can't, like I said before, you can't tell people what to believe, but you can control their behaviors in relationship to other people. Other things that the US government has tolerated over time, conscientious objection. When we've had wars where people are conscripted into the military, people can say, I don't fight, I won't fight, I won't participate in the selective service because of my religious tradition. Is that fair? Is it fair that somebody can just say, oh, well, I'm a Quaker, and so I don't believe in violence, and so I won't fight, I won't go to Vietnam and die, I won't allow my child to be subjected to the horrors of war, I want somebody else's kid to take care of that for me? Is that fair? Today, even we've got challenges with groups in our country that the United States tolerates groups and families that refuse to vaccinate their children, refuse to even have particular medical interventions to save their lives because they believe that God is going to save their child. And sometimes that's tolerated, and sometimes the courts say, no, you can't, prevent this child from receiving life-saving medical intervention, even if you believe that, it's wrong. So what's right? What's the right view there? Is it tolerance or intolerance? And then even deeper, we can keep going and going with this. Can we tolerate intolerance? People who are intolerant in a particular political situation love to ask this question. Oh, well, you're going around telling us that we have to tolerate each other and you have to accept each other, but you're not accepting me and my positions just because I don't like, what you're saying. I'm a white supremacist, and I'm running around, telling people that we should kill all the Black people. How come you don't tolerate my position? Well, there have been times in our world history where that has really come to a head. Particularly, the best example that I can come up with for this is in the post-World War II era. After World War II ended and Nazism was conquered, Hitler was killed or killed himself, and the whole thing went down. The victorious invaders, the Americans, the British, they had to set up basically the same thing as the SS, except in this case, it wasn't against Jews and anti-Nazis, it was against actual Nazis. And so there were constant invasions of the homes of Nazi sympathizers, where they knew that because they had been a Nazi sympathizer, at any moment one of these groups could come and check their house and pillage through and look for contraband and Nazi symbolism and Nazi documentation, and confiscate this stuff, take their relics, take their documents of Nazism. They are trying to squash any residual ideas about this. And they're doing this stuff knowing that what they're doing is exactly what their enemies had been doing before, that they were trying to stop. But they know that they had to do it anyway, because they've got to purge these ideas. They've got to stop this intolerant thinking so that they can keep other people safe, so that they can prevent something like Nazism from happening again. And so, how do we live with this? How do we say that I fought against bigotry, I fought against hatred, I fought against these people that felt like they were the only ones who deserved to live, and then when I win, I turn around and I treat the people that I've been attempting to, contradict the exact same way that they were treating people that I was saying was wrong? How else can you do it? Is there another way? They didn't think so. I can't come up with anything else that would solve that problem. And so, how do we deal with the real life complications of even attempting to be tolerant. Earlier Cindy was saying that tolerance is such a low bar. I don't even know if we can figure out how to be tolerant, let alone anything more than that, with all of these complicating factors. So some people say, well, the easy way to out of all of this is to say that, my belief in a universal truth doesn't stop somebody else from believing in their universal truth. You can believe what you want to believe, and I can believe what I want to believe. But I feel like that even is pretty disingenuous. I wonder, I don't know if Natalia ever had a chance to join us yet. Natalia's there. How does Kevin feel about the idea that I'm sitting over here thinking, well, it's okay that Kevin doesn't believe in God because God loves Kevin anyway, and someday Kevin is going to be with God. That's kind of weird. And that kind of affects my relationship with Kevin, especially if I tell him that, right? Can we have an actual relationship with another person when we think that we know better than that person, what that person is going to go through, or what's important to that person, or how that person's life is going to turn out? You can't really have a meaningful relationship with someone when you have that idea that you know better than them, because you have the universal truth, you have the answer that person doesn't have. Where do we find respect in those kinds of relationships? And so I really struggle with that. I started out with my opinions of people of other faiths and said, well, I don't believe that I'm supposed to be converting everybody to Christianity in a literal kind of way, because I believe that God loves everybody where they are, and that doesn't really matter where you are because I'm a universalist. I believe that God is going to save everybody. But for people who don't believe that, how dare I impose that on them? How dare I make those assumptions within my relationships with those people? It's awkward. It's weird. So how do we do any of this? What do we do with any of this? Answer my question, really. Like, this is not rhetorical. What do we do? I don't know. Who has the answers?
Nobody. I don't know, because when somebody has a universal truth that they believe in, it doesn't matter whether it matches yours or not. That's what they believe.
Yes, but
And how do we know?
but the line has to be drawn. I use an example. I came unglued one day. I drove a school bus for many years. And at last 19 years, we're here in Reading, driving for the high schools. And at this one high school, we were sitting there loading up. Boy got on the bus, sat about 3/4 of the way back, and he ducked down behind the seat, which is the first thing you keep your eye on him, figure out what's going on. When he popped back up, he slipped a t-shirt on him with a swastika on it. He also had a hat with a swastika on it. And I looked up in my mirror and I told him, I said, you can't do that on this bus. You have to take it off. And he said, F you. That's when I came unglued. And I went in the back and I said, you will not wear that on this bus. And he says, yes, I can. I said, if it was legal in the school, I said, you would have gotten on the bus with it. I know for a fact that they don't tolerate this in the school. And this is a school property. I said, you have to remove that stuff. And if you don't, I said, I'm going to write you up and kick you off this bus permanently. He said, well, we can go talk to the principal. I said, let's go. I said, right now. I said, you take it all off or you get off this bus. I said, because I will not allow you to try to influence people with what you're teaching. I said, because it's totally wrong. Okay, and it's not going to happen in this territory on my. And he got off. Never saw him again after that. So was I right to do that then? Because I came intolerant of what he was.
Right, right.
So you can only tolerate to a point when something like that is totally wrong, the belief of it. I still deal with that today. So hopefully he changed his mind about what it really means to be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a
Interesting.
perfect example of the challenge that we're facing here. I mean, it's easy for us to just say, well, of course we want to be tolerant, of course we want to show love to everyone. But what does that really look like in practice when we're talking about our universal truths about what's right and what is appropriate and how we're supposed to view our fellow humans? And when somebody else has a completely opposing view of those types of fundamental understandings, then who's right, who's wrong? How do we interact with that person? How do we have a relationship with that person? Sometimes the answer is, I don't want to have a relationship with that person. I can't have a relationship with that person. Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I feel like we're getting bullied by a lot of small groups that want us to believe their way. And it's getting to where people don't even know. I mean, you can tolerate a person as a person, but do you have to tolerate everything they believe in or stand for?
Mhm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
because they come as a package, you know.
All right.
I don't know.
I think, depending on the severity, I mean, if you're white supremacists or, that, or Nazis, I haven't had a lot of experience with that, but, just on a very day-to-day basis, different political views and different religions, I think unless you're doing or saying something that's offensive or challenging your faith or your beliefs, in my work, we don't talk religion and politics. For those
Right.
reasons. That's the golden rule. And that doesn't mean I don't have faith. And if I'm with the right person, a patient who I know and who's Christian, yeah, we have that conversation. But I don't ever broach the subject or, talk about it with people that I don't know where they stand. So I think I just listen for God's little, listen for the Holy Spirit to work in me, when it's appropriate to talk about it. And I don't think you have to throw it in people's faces, but on the other hand, you got to take a stand for your God. If somebody's speaking their universal truth, I don't think you have to necessarily walk away, but I think in a very kind, loving way, you can say, well, this is what I believe. Let's just agree to disagree. How about that? I don't know.
It's a very challenging
Yeah.
application for sure. So Cindy, since you outed yourself thinking that tolerance is not good enough, what do you think? Still with us?
I am still with you, with everyone. Well, when I think of the word tolerance, I think of putting up with as a synonym. And I just I just think that's an unkind way to approach people. I'm just going to put up with you. That just sounds so negative to me. So there has to be something, I mean, there have to be things, beliefs that we have that for us are non-negotiable,
Mhm.
because, well, here's an old hackneyed phrase from my mother. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yep, that was something from my parents. So there are places in our lives where we have to have something that is non-negotiable. But that still doesn't mean that we can't be kind
Right.
to our fellow human beings.
I agree. Cindy, I'm glad that your issues with tolerance were going that way, the kind way, rather than the other way. I thought I wasn't sure which way you
I
were
don't like
going.
tolerance. I want to be intolerant.
Well, like, yeah, like, these are my standards, and anything beneath those is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So I wasn't really sure which way you were going with that, but I'm glad you clarified it, and I love what you said. Yeah, I agree.
So I kind of came to a similar conclusion, I think, Cindy, to what you said so eloquently there. So I will bring us around to the end here. What is religious tolerance? I don't know. There are a lot of questions, a lot of confusion, a lot of complicating factors. But I do know what religious tolerance is not. It does not look like this. Burning people at the stake. It also doesn't look like this. Protesting against refugees or against people of different religions because you're afraid of the threat that they, in your opinion, make to your way of life or to your control. I think that these are not appropriate ways for us to interact with other people, to reject them, to turn them into somebody that is other than us. I think that the realization that God does not just belong to us, whether we are the tribe of Israel or whether we are the nation of the Jews or whether we are the Christian people who have been grafted onto that group. I don't think that any of us now can claim to be the only people that God loves. And if that's true, then how are we supposed to treat each other? And I think that our Bible tells us about that. So here is every pastor's least favorite wedding passage. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. Interesting. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So I don't know what religious tolerance looks like in every situation. I know that we can't just say everybody can do whatever they want, everybody can believe whatever they want, because that's not how the world works. But I do know that if we want to have genuine relationships with each other, if we want to be genuine evangelists, not proselytizers, but evangelists, then what we have to do is behave in this way. Not in our marriage, because that's not what this passage is about, but in our interactions with people that are incredibly difficult to interact with. Sometimes, which can be our spouse, but not always. Hopefully not as frequently as other people. So that is kind of where I land on this question this week. As usual, I have no answers for you, but I do have this. So any other final thoughts, questions, disagreements?
Nope.
All right. So next week, we have a super interesting question that comes from our friend Louise Wilson. So I have to tell her that we're having this question. Hopefully she'll join us. Question is, did God create other worlds of living creatures? Out there somewhere in the universe, we are finding all these other planets and other galaxies. Did God create other worlds of living creatures in those places? Are we going to discover other life in the universe? And if we do, what does that mean for us theologically? Super awesome question. Very excited.
Do you have an
Fine.
answer to that?
Did God create other worlds of living creatures?
I don't know. Do you have an answer to that?
I don't know. I didn't do any research on it yet. Do you have an answer to that?
No, I'm just debating, should I attend or not? I'm just kidding.
I'm sure that I'll have something to say. I always do.
I'm just kidding. Thank you, Kitty.
All right. Thank you,
I think the
everybody.
first,
Have a
I think
good
the first thing you
weekend.
have to do is,
Awesome. And
all
if
right,
when you get a
bye-bye.
chance, if you think about it, I would love to hear last week's class on.
Oh, yes, I will. I'll put that up to upload now. I have a problem right now because at church, I like to upload these at church while I'm at work, but the internet there is not cooperating with me for the uploads. And so then I have to do it at home. And then when I get home, I forget. So I'll do that one right now so that it's up there for you.
Thank you. I'll have all weekend to listen to it. I'll see you
Yes.
all Monday.
All right.
Bye.
Well,
Take
some
care,
of you.
everybody.
I'll see some of you on Sunday.
Bye.
Bye.
bye.